We should update the 1844 Act for the digital age. And we have a fully worked out proposal which does exactly that, which I'm going to get to very shortly. But first, what are the consequences of banks creating money in this way? Well, one, massive house price inflation. Houses are finite. Banks' ability to lend is almost infinite, provided they can find the borrowers and the depositors. So when you've got a virtually unlimited amount of money chasing a finite housing stock, you get house price inflation. The second consequence is that our national economy is held hostage to the banking system. And that's a big democratic issue. It means our economy is dependent upon the health of the banking system. When the banks sink, we go down with them. And the third consequence is massive indebtedness. Massive indebtedness at a personal, national and international level. The only way to increase the money supply is to go into debt. The only way for the economy to grow is for more and more people to get into more and more debt. There's no debt-free source of money. Just to give you a couple of statistics, according to The Independent on Sunday, Britain is the most personally indebted nation on earth, with the total level of personal debt running to £1.5 trillion. That's 25,000 for every man, woman and child in the UK. That's our personal debt. Our national debt, according to Christopher Booker in the Sunday Telegraph at the weekend, he says, we in Britain are approaching a financial abyss almost as great as that into which Greece has been falling. And he points out that to finance the deficit alone, that's to finance the amount that the public purse is regularly short. We're having to borrow nearly $3 billion a week. And he also points out that despite all the talk of cuts, the fact remains our overall public spending is rising, it's not falling. And national debt's projected to reach $1 trillion by the end of this year. That's doubled in 6 years. And these are unsustainable levels of debt. We're heading for the rocks. So where is that lighthouse which can show us the way? Because we need to find it, and we need to find it fast. So I started this talk in 1844, and I'm going to end by making reference to 1694. That's when the institution was formed, whose imposing building is just a stone's throw from here, the Bank of England. And it was formed as a private company, and remarkably it remained a private company right up until it was nationalised by the Labour government of Clement Attlee in 1946. And the Nationalisation of the Bank of England Act could be said to be another monetary reform act, perhaps only two that I can think of on the British statute book. And today the bank is a fully publicly owned institution. However, the nationalisation of the Bank of England didn't actually change the British banking system in any way. Most money was back then, and most certainly even more so is today, created by the private banking sector, created by the commercial banks, the high street banks. So 1694 was 317 years ago. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long time coming. But 317 years later, we finally have the blueprint for the Bank of England upon which it should have been constructed all those years ago. Our proposed Bank of England creation of currency bill. I should say this is a draft bill that we as campaigners are promoting. It's not been tabled in Parliament. We've had a team of money reform experts and people who know how to draft legislation working on this for 2 years now. It's laid out as a proper Westminster bill should be. We have the actual legislation, and we have the explanatory notes which refer to each section and each paragraph and explain the point of them. And don't be intimidated by the legislation, because the explanatory notes are in plain English. And they explain to an extent that's never been explained before in the United Kingdom or elsewhere, the extent to which we have a problem and the extent to which this is the solution. George Osborne, the Chancellor, is on record as saying that we have no plan B. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is our plan B. It's the first fully worked out, debt-free money reform proposal in proper legislative language ever written. What is this document's proper value? Well, let me tell you. The organisation Positive Money has calculated that the policy contained in this document is actually worth, to the average 20-year-old today, something in the region of £500,000 savings in the course of his or her life over the present system. Not only that, but the policy in this document could reduce our taxes by up to 30% a year, saving us all around 200 billion a year. In other words, we could actually wipe out income tax and we could wipe out council tax. And not only that, but wait for this, the majority of our horrendous national debt could be phased out over around 15 years, saving the taxpayer up to 200 million per day on interest payments. And all these things have been carefully calculated. Talk about a lighthouse in our troubled economic sea. Ladies and gentlemen, this light that shines in darkness now will safely lead us over. Because if it wasn't for this lighthouse, our ship would be no more. And you know what? It can also be adopted by any political viewpoint, because this isn't a party political issue any more than 2 + 2 = 4 is a party political issue. They're both just good mathematical and accounting sense. So, to conclude by answering the question, is EU membership a roadblock to monetary reform? Some people have suggested that that can't go through because Article 123 of the Lisbon Treaty says that, and I paraphrase, overdraft facilities or any other type of credit facility with the central banks of the member states in favour of central governments shall be prohibited, as shall the purchase directly from them by central banks of debt instruments. Well, what that means in plain English is simply that a national central bank, such as the Bank of England, is prohibited from lending money directly to the government, and it's prohibited from buying debt instruments directly from the government. It prohibits central banks from financing government by lending to them or purchasing debt instruments from them. And that's the reason why the quantitative easing programme at the moment that the Bank of England is running is purchasing debt instruments not from the Treasury but from the private sector. It's not directly financing the government, it's doing it in the secondary market, the banking market. However, this prohibition clearly does not prevent the Bank of England simply printing money and granting it to Parliament, as we money reformers propose, probably because the EU hasn't actually thought of such a radical solution. So technically there's nothing prohibiting this bill from passing right now. But clearly, you know what, if ever came to the wire, this proposal would create an almighty stink in the corridors of Brussels. But right now, nothing's stopping us from campaigning for it, nothing's stopping us from making the case, nothing's stopping us from persuading the public, the media, the legislators, the politicians. But if it came to the wire, would the EU try to stop us? Possibly, possibly not. Ultimately, as we know, if the EU doesn't like something, it can't stop Britain doing what we think is in our best interests. Any attempt to bring in this bill may involve some kind of confrontation with the EU, in which case the EU will either back down and let us have it, or it won't back down and If we're determined, we can go our own way and we can leave the EU. Make no mistake, this is a very powerful proposal. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to investigate it in more depth. Copies are over there. Thank you for listening.